Hey everyone, and welcome to Flying Geese Theology, episode number 2. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the intellectual virtue of charity. What is it? Why does it matter? How can it help us live as the church more fully and more lovingly towards each other? So let's get into it. So, charity as an intellectual virtue. No, we're not talking about charity as in giving money to people who are poor or needy. We're thinking about charity specifically in regards to the mind. So we have virtues or virtues, we might say, which is just behaviors, actions, ways of living that are good, that are morally upright. But then we can modify the word virtue in a variety of ways. So we might talk about financial virtues, of which charity would actually also be a financial virtue. Or we might talk about relational virtues. And that would be virtues that relate to how we live in relation to other people. Or a financial virtue would be virtues with regards to money. And so an intellectual virtue is simply something that is morally upright to do regarding the way that we live. Charity as an intellectual virtue is important for us as Christians to practice because it's listening to someone the way that you would want to be listened to. Right? If we just want to maybe kind of add a little bit or switch the verb in the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them to do unto you. The intellectual virtue of charity is listen unto others as you would have them listen unto you. And so what that means is giving a full and reasonable hearing to somebody, especially when they're expressing an opinion or a view that is different than yours. Listening to them and taking their view in its best possible form. So it means that as I listen to someone who maybe has a different view of what scripture is than me, or a different view of how ministry should be done than me, I'm not listening with the intent of poking holes. I'm listening with the intent of understanding it, and understanding it in as good of a form as it could ever possibly be in. And we can see also the flip side of this, of what we might call like the intellectual vice of hate or of hatred, wherein we're never really listening to somebody express their opinion in a way that is helpful or in a way that is loving. We're only listening with the intent of destroying and of tearing down. And so the way that we know that we've actually practiced charity as an intellectual virtue is if we can then express to this person what their view is in our own words in a way that they agree with, where they say, yeah, that actually is what I meant. Or, yeah, I agree with that statement completely. And then from there, we can go on to discuss maybe where it is that our views are different, or why it is that even though we understand their view in its best possible form, we don't agree with it. The reason why I think that the intellectual virtue of charity matters so much for the church is because it's listening to people. It's loving people, right? And so church or the life of the church isn't very easily practiced in a top-down format. It doesn't necessarily work very well over time to have things always be, well, we're doing this because I have decided to do this and you don't get a say in it. By its very nature, the church is going to have people who both have equal stake in something disagreeing over how to do that thing. So two parents who disagree over how youth group should be run. Or even just two congregants who disagree over what the best type of music for a worship service is. Because churches so often rely on volunteers, rely on congregation members for the manpower to do a lot of these activities, we need to practice charity with each other as we listen. We don't get to just discount someone who thinks that sung worship should be only hymns. Just like we don't get to discount someone who thinks that sung worship should be mostly modern songs or all modern songs. Without the intellectual virtue of charity in the church, what happens is we just start talking past each other and not really listening to each other. And eventually that will just lead to church splits because nobody ever is given a full hearing to offer any sort of substantial change. And so they will probably just leave and go to a church that does things the way that they want, where they don't have to now practice the virtue of charity, at least with regards to that thing, because the church is already doing it the way they want. Without this virtue, churches will begin dividing and splitting and fracturing, maybe not in like official church splits. You might not have, a large group say, we're going to go start our own church, but just slowly over time, as people aren't heard and don't have their opinions respected in any form, will just slowly filter out. And the great news is that you'll end up with a church that looks and thinks exactly like whoever's in charge, and everything will be easy. And that's not good news. That's not how the church is supposed to be. As Christians, as church members, whenever somebody has a disagreement with us over the music choice or the preaching style or a particular ministry, we don't get to just discount them because they're different than us. We have to listen to them, because if we don't, what we're really demonstrating is that we don't love them. We don't value them. We don't respect them. And as Jesus says, right, that they will know you are my disciples by the way you love one another. And how can we say that we love one another if we're not even willing to listen to each other? And so charity as an intellectual virtue is so important. It's so important that we really listen to each other, that we really try as hard as we can to listen and to understand what someone else is saying. Because otherwise it will just lead to church splits. It will just lead to hurt feelings and to disagreements. But on the other hand, and I've seen this in action, when we do our best to listen to someone and understand what they're saying, and then we're able to express to them, so it sounds to me like what you're saying is the yada, yada, yada. And they say, yeah, that is what I'm saying. That then when we still disagree, if we can then express what exactly maybe the source of the disagreement is, or, be able to say, I see the value in that, and I see where you're coming from, but I still think that this is the better way. That disagreement will almost always go more smoothly because they feel heard, because they feel listened to. And so how can I practice the intellectual virtue of charity today, tomorrow in our church? I think that the easiest way is, like I just said, when a disagreement arises, try as hard as you can to really listen to them, and then try to say back to them what it is that they're saying. Easy transition statements into this are, so I hear you saying, or so what it sounds like you're saying is, and then until they agree, yes, that is what I'm saying, keep going back and forth. So if you say, so it seems like what you're saying is ABC, and they say, well, not quite, I'm actually saying BCD. And you say, okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is BCDE. And they say, no, that's not quite. I'm really saying BCD and not E, right? And you go back and forth until you both agree this is what this person is saying. And then the conversation can move forward. And hopefully it won't always be that tedious, right? As we get better at listening to people, hopefully it should only take one, maybe two go-arounds of this. And some people are clearer than others about what it is that they're actually trying to say. As we do that, we're practicing charity. We're giving them a charitable listen. And the friction that so often happens in disagreements will hopefully just start to be sanded down by this virtue. I think another way that we can practice the intellectual virtue of charity is especially important when listening to sermons. It's so easy to, in the middle of a sermon, the pastor says something and you go, that doesn't sound quite right to me. And then you just stop listening entirely and spend the entire time trying to work out where it is exactly they went wrong, that one statement, 2 points ago. I fall into this. I'm sure you fall into this as well. It's so easy to do that. And so again, this is a place where practicing charity is important. And it might be something as simple as saying, I don't really know about that, but I'm going to keep listening and maybe it'll make sense. And if it still doesn't make sense, trying your best to kind of put that out of your mind and say, okay, but I can still listen to the sermon. I can still pay attention to what the pastor is saying. And I can still strive to hear the word of God communicated to me through this sermon. The easiest way to do this that I've found, and this is not my own invention, one of my professors shared this with me, is that if you're a note taker during sermons, which different topic, but highly advise taking notes during sermons. As you're taking notes, when the pastor says something or makes some comment that kind of make me go, I'm not sure about that. I'll just open a bracket, write out a quick comment about what I disagree with. And then when I close the bracket, that thought is closed and done with. And I'm not going to think about it now because I closed the bracket. That's an easy way to begin practicing this. It helps you just kind of put those aside for now. And maybe you want to think about it later. That can be good as well. But it lets you put that aside for now and continue listening to the sermon charitably. So those are 2 quick ways that we can practice the virtue of charity this Sunday, tomorrow. I don't know if it's tomorrow for you. It's tomorrow for me. It's Saturday right now as I'm recording this. And so tomorrow I will go to church and I'll get an opportunity to practice the virtue of charity as I listen to the sermon. All right. Thanks for watching, everyone, or listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Really helps the channel out. And follow me wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. See you next time.